like the Impact Fund because it, in a way, it expresses our values and our ideas about particularly about social justice.
The Impact Fund to me is looking at the system, not just the projects.
But I think the Impact Fund is really exciting because it's not been done in Australian philanthropy before.
The impact projects are going to change Australia for the better. There is no doubt about that. Everything from strengthening our democracy, supporting change in our environmental legislation, supporting Aboriginal kids. I mean, all of these projects are so worthy.
These are the big challenges facing Australia right now, facing the world in many respects right now, and it's great to see a program of work from a philanthropic perspective dedicated to fund great ideas that are making an impact to build a better Australia and to build a better world.
A very warm welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us here tonight. I'm Marie Saidi, CEO of the Australian Communities Foundation, and it's an absolute privilege to see such a full room. For those of you who were here earlier, we also received a warm and generous welcome to country from Uncle Colin Hunter Jr. I'm always struck by the generous invitation that is offered time and again for us to be here on this country, that Australians' Indigenous peoples have been careful custodians of for so many generations. In that spirit, I acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. We are here tonight to celebrate hope and belief in the power of collective agency. The fact that you are here shows that you care about the future of our country and that you are ready to reimagine what Australia could become. So at the start of this inspiring evening, I'm going to ask you to take a moment to stop and reflect on what motivated you to come here tonight. Take a moment to pause and think about why you were in the room. What brings you here? Perhaps you're an activist, an entrepreneur, a donor, an investor, a trustee, an employee, a friend, a family member, a parent. Our individual motivations will be many and varied, but our hope is that we are all here because we believe that things could be better and that we have the agency to achieve that. So tonight is a joint effort. What we will be doing is collectively backing initiatives that have been chosen because they are best placed of all the initiatives and change makers that we spoke to over the past year to bring about real change. Why can we say this so confidently? Because as a giving community, we have already helped catalyse momentous change across the country. We have helped defend safe access laws to ensure women can get to abortion clinics free from harassment. We were part of the sustained pressure which saw 8 AFL clubs plus Coles and Woolies exiting the pokies industry, saving communities across Australia enormous social harm. We responded to an urgent call to action to ensure people in offshore detention are appropriately triaged. As of September, 156 refugees were transferred to Australia for urgent medical care under the Medivac legislation. We were also part of one of Australia's largest ever mobilisation of funders and activists to successfully support the Marriage Equality Campaign. We've helped establish an independent initiative to foster and grow public interest journalism. We've supported grassroots activism against the building of a new coal mine, helping preserve the Great Barrier Reef. We have supported Australia's first ever coalition for gun law reform, which has helped stem the incremental weakening of our national gun laws. And we have influenced public policy to ensure that one of our most successful long-term employment programs for Indigenous people on country continues to operate and scale. 4 years ago, the Impact Fund was conceived as a way of bringing people together so that we could amplify our giving and invest in bold solutions to some of the country's biggest challenges. Back then, there were few opportunities in Australia for funders and changemakers to work together to strategically tackle the big issues facing our nation. As a community, we wanted to push boundaries and challenge the status quo by investing in advocacy and campaigns and research and pilot projects, but most importantly, in people. Through the Impact Fund, we've been able to deepen our partnerships with some of this country's most effective changemakers. But it was also designed to connect each one of us in this room to the big issues facing our nation and provide us with an avenue for collective action. With inequality widening by the day, threats that undermine democracies around the world, and the reality of climate change being not just a crisis but a full-scale emergency, the work of the people you will hear from tonight is more critical than ever. Equity and justice are aspirations that demand bold commitments. Holding legislators to account is key. All the initiatives we have supported have enabled Australians to speak their truth to power. And tonight, we have another group of incredible changemakers pitching their solutions to tough problems. All have been shortlisted and selected in collaboration with many people in this room, and we thank each of you for your passion and commitment. All the initiatives have successfully demonstrated 4 key criteria: national significance, timeliness, ability to influence public policy, and most importantly, the potential to mobilise people to action. As we hear these presentations, I'd invite you to think big. Be inspired by what's possible. Know that you can deliver real support, know that your support can deliver real impact, and that collectively we can make a game-changing difference when we put people and planet first. Tonight, the call to action, your call to action, is to rally behind the changemakers in this room and to give together to achieve real change. Please join us.
Well, thank you, Marie. Thank you, Marie. And welcome everybody again. We're so thrilled to have so many people in the room. It's really exciting. So thank you for choosing to spend your evening with us tonight. I'm Louise, Head of Philanthropy and Impact at Australian Communities Foundation, and I am joined by Georgia Matthews, who's Grants Manager at Australian Communities Foundation, and we will be your MCs for the evening. So lucky you. Wait, hold your applause. We haven't really done much yet. It might be a slow burn. So we're going to explain the proceedings for the evening, what will happen. But firstly, a few housekeeping things. So the exit and the toilets are straight out the door you came in through, so right at the back of the room. The proceedings will run until shortly before 8, and at that time we will invite you to continue your conversations and enjoy some more food and drink. Our Twitter handle is ACF Inspires, and the hashtag for tonight is #ImpactFund. How did that go?
I always laugh at Louise when she says #anything because she sounds like a mum.
Cool! I'm very hip.
Anyway, yeah, so as we've said, we're going to hear from 4 organisations that are tackling issues of national significance tonight. And they were selected really carefully by ACF funders, the broader philanthropic community, civil society leaders and the ACF team. And they were selected for, amongst other things, their ability to influence systemic change, their alignment with the impact area, and their timeliness. So I'd invite you to keep those things front of mind as you're listening along tonight. As Louise said, we're going to MC, so we'll be introducing people and outroing them as we go along. So you'll probably be sick of us by the end. But before we do that, I thought that it would be helpful to explain how each of the presentations will actually go. So who here has been to a Funding Network event? A lot of you, yep, makes sense. So thanks to the Funding Network for providing pitch training to the presenters tonight. So you'll be pretty familiar with this format. So first up, each presenter will have 6 minutes to talk about their work. At the 5-minute mark, they'll hear a bell, which is 1 minute warning. And then at the 6-minute mark, they'll hear another bell, which will be basically they have to stop talking at that point. And then they'll get a moment to catch their breath while we hear from a couple of members of the audience who we're calling our funder advocates, who are people that are already supporting the work. So they're people that can speak to why they see the value in the work that's being done and why they're passionate about it, which can be really compelling. So thank you to our funder advocates for being here. And then it's over to you to do Q&A. So we'll facilitate that. Again, it's going to be for 6 minutes. So at the 5-minute mark, what will we hear? And then at the 6-minute mark, it will be silent. No, there'll be a bell. Then basically we will be holding you to account when it comes to your timing. So we thought it's only fair if we're asking the presenters to stick to time that we also ask you to stick to time. So please be succinct with your questions. Nobody likes a comment that's dressed up as a question, so keep that in mind.
So the Impact Fund is putting $35,000 on the table for each of these projects. But that is not all they need to succeed. So we're inviting you to co-fund with us, to partner with us and our community partners to help them achieve these ambitious goals that you're about to hear about. So all of the information that you need about these projects are in the Impact Fund prospectus that you would have found on your seat before you sat down. So feel free to flick through that prospectus as we go on. And like Marie said, we encourage you to think big. So while you're listening, we hope that you're inspired to join us and to join these community partners to create a fairer and more sustainable Australia. So let's get started. Our first presenter is Charmaine Crowe. She is the Senior Advisor for Social Security at the Australian Council of Social Services, or ACOSS. Charmaine is talking to us about the Raise the Rate campaign. So can you please welcome Charmaine?
How would you spend $40? Top up your Mikey card, dry cleaning, maybe take a friend out for brunch. Imagine if that was all you had to spend in a day. New Start is the unemployment payment in Australia, and if you're on it, you have to survive on $40 a day. That's about $14,500 a year, less than half the minimum wage. Now think about after paying rent, all you're left with is $28 a day. Go to the supermarket, you walk straight past the fresh fruit, vegetables, meat, things that you would have put in your trolley at another time, but now reserved for special occasions only. You pick up some bread, milk, oats for porridge because that's cheap. You also pick up a 6-pack of fruit juice poppers because at 30 cents a popper, they're cheaper than apples, and at least it allows you to have a little bit of vitamin C. You're out of phone credit and you need your phone to get paid work. The cheapest recharge you can get is $15. You've already spent $23 of your daily budget and you haven't even had breakfast yet. You have a job presentation skill workshop later on in the day. You feel insulted because you're 46 and you've got years of professional experience behind you, but this means very little in the Centrelink system. You have to take a bus to get there, which costs $5 for the round trip, and so there goes your daily budget. On the bus ride home, you're thinking about all the things that you need but can't afford. your blood pressure medication, the electricity bill that's due that week. And as the anxiety builds, you think about the fact that you've had to live on this payment for the last 12 months. This is the kind of stress that's felt by almost 1 million people in Australia every day because they're trying to get by on Newstart or another allowance. Newstart was last increased in real terms 25 years ago, and we at ACOSS hear these stories every day. There are half the Newstart population is aged 45 and over. 40% of people on Newstart have an illness or a disability that actually prevents them from working full time. There are 80,000 single parents trying to raise their kids on Newstart. If the federal government increased Newstart by $75 per week, it would allow these people to focus on their futures rather than being completely consumed by the financial stress that they're currently living. Increasing Newstart would address one of the major fairness failures we have in Australia. It would cost $3.3 billion to do. Now, to put that into perspective, the government's tax cut package for high-income earners cost triple that. Importantly, as Deloitte has found, it would inject $4 billion into the economy, with the biggest benefits felt in struggling rural and regional communities. And this is one of the key reasons why leading economists all agree that increasing Newstart is the right thing to do. At ACOSS, we have been focused on reducing poverty and inequality, and a key part of that has been the Raise the Rate campaign, which kicked off in 2017. But for years we have been advocating for an increase to this payment, directly lobbying government. But we decided that we needed to intensify this effort. We needed to mobilise and grow the supporter base. So in a relatively short period of time, and with some generous assistance from the philanthropic community, many of whom are here tonight, we have managed to increase the support. We now have every major business lobby supporting an increase to Newstart. Prominent people like John Howard, John Hewson, Heather Ridout are all on board. The majority of the Senate back an increase to Newstart. CWA, the AMA are all on side. Even Barnaby Joyce thinks Newstart needs to increase. And whilst we are so close to winning this campaign, we're not there yet. That's why we're here tonight. We need your support. We need your support to strengthen the already compelling case for change by updating the economic benefit research and looking at the cost shifting that's happening from the federal to state governments right now. We need to be able to hire another campaigner so that we can grow the network of prominent people who support the campaign. That takes time, that takes relationship building, and we can't do that with our current tiny team. We want to be able to further empower the grassroots organisations led by people on Newstart and volunteers. We want to continue to be able to provide them with financial assistance, training, mentoring, so that their own Raise the Rate campaigns can bloom. And finally, we need to amplify the voices of people affected. People on Newstart are at the heart of this campaign, and it's their stories that will win over hearts and minds. Please join us so that we can take this campaign into 2020 and so that we can achieve the single most effective step to reduce poverty and inequality in this country, which is increasing Newstart. Thank you.
Done. Well done, Charmaine. Thank you. We will now hear from a funder and advocate for Raise the Rate. Paul Madden from the Wyatt Trust has something to say.
Good evening. My name is Paul Madden from the Wyatt Trust in Adelaide, and we've been working with a group of about 12 foundations Australia-wide in supporting the ACOSS campaign to raise the rate of Newstart allowance. And I might say, great work, Charmaine.
Thanks, Paul.
Why are we doing this? Well, for a start, there's a huge issue around adequacy of the New Start allowance. At $175 per week less than the age pension, it's putting people into grinding poverty, poverty that strips them of dignity and strips them of hope. The second is that it locks them in there, on average 3 years on New Start allowance. Can you imagine 3 years on New Start allowance at $40 a day? It's locking people into poverty. And thirdly, in the words of FDR in 1937, he said, "The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much, but whether we provide enough for those who have too little." In Australia today, we are failing that test, and I implore you to get on board with the ACOSS campaign, and together, let's raise the rate of New Start allowance.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paul. So we now have 2 ACF staff members with roving mics. If you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll come to you. Just remember, we only have 6 minutes for questions, so please keep them short and succinct.
This will be very short. How are you going to persuade Scott Morrison and Josh Frydenberg to raise the rate? We might all agree, but you're, with the greatest respect, preaching to the converted.
Well, I'm pleased to announce that just today the New South Wales government expressed its support for an increase to New Start. It's the first Liberal government that's done so. So we need to keep doing what we're doing. You know, I think the government will eventually come on board when the rest of the community is on board. 70% of voters support an increase to New Start. So, you know, it really is just time for the federal government to join the rest of the community, and I'm confident we can do that. We have seen Conservative supporters of the campaign. Barnaby Joyce is joined by a number of other Conservative members of the Parliament, Dean Smith, Russell Broadbent. We're wanting to grow that group, and we see that as being a key way to getting the leadership to act.
Hi. What are the main arguments or pushback that you're getting from the people whose minds you're trying to change, and how will this funding that you raise from ACF and others address those challenges?
The cost of it is regularly raised, and so our job is to convince government decision makers to choose to increase this payment as opposed to putting the money elsewhere. As I noted, the tax cut package costs far more than what lifting New Start would cost, and yet it's benefiting a community who are wealthy. They don't need the extra dollars, when we really should be directing that into the hands of people with the least. Those tax cuts are yet to go through. They are the later ones. Key goal for us is to get the government of the day to choose to put that money into the pockets of people on New Start. And just to add to that, what we will do with the money is further the research that we've managed to get done, which is really very little, to make the economic case for the campaign. You know, we really need to appeal to Conservative thinkers to show that this makes economic sense to do so.
If I missed this, forgive me, but when's your timeline? When do we need, I mean, obviously yesterday, but when do we see the change?
So we've broken up the next stages of the campaign into 2 phases. We obviously want to see change as soon as possible. Phase 4 goes to June 2020. We would love to see action taken in the 2020 budget, for instance. If we are unsuccessful, then we will certainly be gunning for the 2021 budget to see change. So that next phase would be a 12-month time frame.
Yes, good evening. Like your talk very much. Thank you very much. Don't get me wrong with my question. I'm very much in favour of increasing New Start. But the question is, the government, of course, says that many people have other welfare payments given to them. in varying sizes. Have you done any research in that area? How many of the people on Newstart do get other payments? What are the size of those payments? Can you shed any light on any of that?
Great question. Look, everyone on Newstart gets one other supplementary payment, which is the energy supplement. That with Newstart still leaves you with $40 a day. And most people on Newstart just get those two payments. 40% of people get rent assistance, but that's $10 a day. That's the maximum amount. And to get that, you need to be paying twice that amount in rent. So you're already behind the 8 ball. So when I say that people are living on $28 a day, that's what they are living on if they're lucky after paying rent. 20% of people on Newstart get family payments, but they are designed to help with the cost of raising children. And people in paid work get those payments as well. So there really is a very strong case to lift the base rate of Newstart because overwhelmingly, even with supplements, if you're getting them, it's inadequate.
Thanks, Charmaine. One of the reasons why there's such an egregious gap between the different payments, and as was mentioned, there's a big gap now between the age pension and Newstart, and of course the disability pension is more than Newstart as well. And part of that is the nature of the indexation. Yeah. So it's not really the main message around raise the rate I'm interested in. It was more just what are you doing about those underlying things which will end up having it fall behind again even after they've raised it once. How do we get the right indexation underneath it as well?
Absolutely. So part of the campaign is that we're calling for the indexation to change of Newstart, so that it's indexed to wages as well, so that we're not in this situation again 25 years from now. We also want to see there be a Social Security Commission that would advise the Parliament ongoing on the adequacy of income support payments, so that we somewhat take the politics out of setting payment rates, because pensions are higher because, governments want to get the older vote, and we've not seen that with the unemployment payment. It's a good question.
We've probably got time for one last burning question, if there is one. Just down the front here, Daff.
I heard that you're getting started with a $35,000 assistance from the funds. So how much do you want to spend on this campaign? What are you looking for to make an impact?
The funding that we're seeking for Phase 4 is about $280,000. That would help us continue to secure the full-time campaigner position that we currently have beyond December this year. Also allow us to hire another person to assist him with the campaigning, as well as get that research done, continue with the media work that we've been doing that has been quite successful, and also, pay for consultants, other things that you need in the campaign. Thank you.
And through the impact fund process, we're trying or endeavouring to raise 150,000. So we're putting 35 on the table, and looking to co-fund for the rest up to 150. Thank you so much, Charmaine. Stellar effort. Well done. Can we all just give Charmaine another hand?
So next up we'll be hearing from Andrew Cox, who is the CEO of the Invasive Species Council, on protecting Australian species against extinction. Thanks, Andrew.
So in 1900, Eastern Australia had 4 million, let's move out of the way, 4 million hectares of prickly pear. By 1920, the early 1920s, we had 17 million hectares of prickly pear. By the late 1920s, we had 30 million hectares. More than half the farmlands were affected by prickly pear, rendered unusable. And the emus, the currawongs, the crows were slaughtered because they were spreading the seeds of the prickly pear. Toxic arsenic was laid on the ground. It was a nightmare. It was a nightmare for people and for the environment. But then Australian scientists searched the world looking for something that would be an enemy of the prickly pear. They looked at 150 different species, and they found a moth, the Cactoblastus cactorum from Argentina, that had a voracious appetite for the prickly pear. Now the good news is that 3 billion eggs were distributed, and within a decade, an area the size of Victoria was free of the prickly pear. This is a success story. And if we can apply the same resolve and collaboration that we took to the prickly pear threat and applied it to today's threats, then imagine what we could achieve. So Australia's subject to an extinction crisis right now. We're in the midst of it. Already we have over 80 plants and animals extinct, unique plants and animals extinct, which are gone forever. We have 1,700 species which are threatened with extinction. So what would it take to overcome these major threats to our native plants and animals? Well, what we should be doing is addressing those threats. We should be addressing the threats systematically. Rather than looking at the threats the species one by one, let's address the major threats facing all of our species and develop national plans. Now, thankfully, Australia already has such a system. It's a system which lists the threats to our native environment, and it comes up with plans. That system is called the KTP system, the Key Threatening Process System. Now that system is defined by legislation. It's the only system in the world like this. The system, after you list the threats, you develop plans of action for research. You identify the targets, and you have specific actions that both all governments and other sectors work towards addressing these threats. It's systematic. It's the way we should be reducing the threats to nature. This is what it's meant to be doing in theory. But actually, it's not working that way. Some threats are being addressed properly, and two good examples: longline fishing. The threat process has improved fishing practices, and now albatrosses and other seabirds not so many are killed by longline fishing. Another example, red important fire ants, which we're battling in Queensland, highly invasive ant. We now have an eradication program in place. But on the whole, the system is failing. We have a system that could be doing better to reduce the threats to nature. Last year, we did a review of the system, and we found only 4 of the threats were being managed in a good status, 4 were fair, and the rest either didn't have a plan or were managed poorly. The process was subject to political interference. Even the government, the minister has directed there should be no more threats listed since 2011. The plans are without ambition. And as you can see, not all the threats are listed. So our goal is to make the KTP system work better. It can be a world-leading system because we'll inspire other countries, and it will help us address global warming. So we need to kickstart these reforms. Earlier this year, we held a workshop with experts and scientists to work out what we need to do. And we worked out with the $150,000 that the Invasive Species Council needs to make this work, we want to implement what the expert told us. We want to convene a working group of experts to develop the reform program, to develop case studies and do the analysis. And we need to form a consortium to actually work together to develop the solutions. That's environmentalists, Indigenous people, industry groups, local government, and so that we actually slowly but collaboratively work on solving the threats. So please, I encourage you, like for the prickly pear, the collaborative efforts to address the threats, come together and help us lay the foundations to reduce the threats to all of nature. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Thank you, Andrew. That damn prickly pear. So we're now going to hear from somebody who already supports the work of Invasive Species Council, who is also a member of the ACF family, and that's Bruce McGregor of Meliadora Fund. Thanks, Bruce.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much. Well, I wear several hats. So one of the hats I wear is the president of the Victorian National Parks Association. So I can vouch directly about Andrew's effectiveness because some years ago he completed for us a very comprehensive nature conservation review. And it's a scientific basis for the work that the Victorian National Parks Association does. But Andrew has extensive experience and knowledge in conservation and natural resource management. And he's had many skills in dealing with very complicated issues. He's very persuasive when you get him in a room, very. And at the Invasive Species Council, he's brought the strategic intent to their program. They've been very successful, and over the last few years they've scored quite a number of wins. So for example, most of invasive species have been only considered from an agricultural point of view, and the government is now moving towards environmental assessment of these things. There was a lot of buck passing going on between all levels of government, and so Andrew's work with the Invasive Species Council is bringing these different levels and tiers of management together to get a coherent policy. So I can say to you that the Invasive Species Council, it is definitely national, it is very strategic, and it's very influential. They've drawn in and collaborated with many organisations, and they are effective in leading other bodies, including many NGOs. So we strongly support, we strongly endorse them, and we encourage you to support us in helping them.
Great. So, question time. What do we got? It's 100% new information for me when I first heard it, so you've got to have some questions. Here we go. Thanks, Louise.
Andrew, I'm wondering how you balance existing threats in Australia, such as cats and foxes, with the threat of new pests coming in from overseas. How do you manage the balance between existing and new?
I'll introduce you to Carol Booth, my colleague.
Good evening, everyone. The Key Threatening Process System, or KTP system, primarily focuses on established threats. Because the threat of extinction is so extreme from a lot of these key threats, we just can't ignore the established species already here. Invasive Species Council has done a lot of work on trying to stop new species arriving, because that makes a whole heap of sense. You prevent them arriving, you save a lot of effort, you save a lot of grief, you save a lot of money. We can use the KTP system as well for emerging threats, and that's certainly one of our goals. But at this stage, we want to take a comprehensive approach, and it's not just invasive species. So invasive species are the primary cause of animal extinctions in Australia. Habitat loss is another major cause, primarily of threatened plants. And there's, as you saw in the previous slide, there's a whole heap of other threats as well that all warrant a much more ambitious, energetic, better funded effort to abate their threats. The story of the prickly pears is really emblematic, because it shows you what can be done when there's just no thought of giving up. And so we need that same effort with all of the threats, including those that are not yet here.
Thanks, Carol. Someone else? Down the back? We'll go to you next, Philip.
Hi, I'm from Nature Foundation SA. My name's Patrick Mansell. Great talk, and we have some properties in South Australia that are in the arid land systems. So I just, with our properties, we've got feral cats on those properties, and we've had some people come through and trying to eradicate those feral cats. And it was very alarming because there was about 20 native reptiles or birds or different types of species in those cat gut analysis, and I think it's very alarming in Australia, the amount of animals that are getting, I guess, taken by feral species, and I guess I'd like to know from you what some of those solutions might be with cats in that instance.
I mean, feral cats is actually officially listed in the KTP system already. It's recognised as a threat, and it's probably one of the areas where the threat abatement process has actually worked to some extent. It's brought together a lot of the researchers, a lot of people on the ground. So we really want to learn from that, but also make it better, because while feral cats are a big threat, and probably the biggest threat to our mammals, there are other threats too. So we need to, I guess, make that process stronger for cats, but also extend it to other threats, to all of nature.
Yeah, cats have only recently been recognised for the really major threat they are. It was quite mysterious for a long while why we were losing a lot of mammals up in northern Australia when it seems like such an not quite pristine, but a natural environment. And there's now a lot of evidence that cats are the primary threat, and that's driven the sort of effort that will eventually yield results, because it was made a priority by the Threatened Species Commissioner. And so it did bring together researchers with land managers, with government people, and also non-government. Andrew's on the Feral Cat Task Force. And it's going to be a long while until we solve that problem, but we're a very innovative species ourselves. And when we really put our mind to it, it's amazing what we do come up with. So there are some really interesting feral cat management techniques coming up.
Thanks. I think we've got time for one more. Philip?
Thank you. You've described what seems like a very big problem, a very far-reaching problem. You've just said it may be a long time to solve most of it. How will you measure success from this project and from this activity?
Well, first of all, I should mention what we're doing here. This needs to happen long term, and we want to use the consortium model to build lasting relationships. And also, we're going to be seeking other funds to supplement this. So this is really the seed funding to grow the restart of the KTP process. Sorry, I've just forgotten the question.
Oh, I think I've had a mental blank as well. I thought he was answering it. Yes, so there are a number of key measures of success. One is obviously to get government to adopt the reforms that we advocate. So we've come up with a set of comprehensive reforms, and we'll be working as advocates to try and get those adopted. Another measure of success is to establish this consortium, cross-sectoral collaborative consortium, to work together on some of the projects and to basically bring government along, because when government's not leading, the community and other groups need to step in. We want that to be an enduring body, and which will inject a lot more ambition and energy into the process. I mean, as it is, it's a bureaucratic process that lacks ambition, lacks commitment. We want to bring that in by having an enduring cross-sectoral body to do that.
Great. Thank you. Give it up for Carol and Andrew. Woo!
So our next presenter will be Gemma McKinnon. So Gemma is the Centre Fellow at University of New South Wales Indigenous Law Centre, and she'll be supported by Ali Haig, Trust and Foundations Manager for the new University of New South Wales. So welcome Gemma and Ali.
Three years ago, the Prime Minister set up the Referendum Council. Chaired by Arnie Pat Anderson and Mark Liebler, they were tasked with running a series of 13 regional dialogues across the country and asking Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities what they wanted from constitutional recognition. I was engaged to run working groups at every single dialogue across the country and talk to community members about Section 5126 of the Constitution, the race power. Section 5126 gives the Commonwealth Government the power to make laws about any race of people. Constitutional law is complex, but this didn't stop the amazing men and women at every dialogue from dedicating an entire weekend to understanding the law, considering the options before them, and importantly, suspending reality for the weekend and daring to imagine that the world can be a better place. What really impressed me was that the participants had come up with an idea that the multitude of lawyers, judges, and experts hadn't considered before. They proposed that a First Nations voice to Parliament could decide when and how the race power is used. These decisions shouldn't fall solely on parliamentarians and High Court judges who will never feel the impacts of the laws that they create. Former High Court Chief Justice Murray Gleeson thinks it's a pretty good idea, and for the record, I think it's a fantastic idea. This is what happens when we give people a voice. It's powerful. And what we know from the dialogue process is that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Australia feel voiceless. Soon after the Uluru Statement was delivered, the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, rejected our call for a voice, treaty, and truth-telling. I was angry at how easily our Prime Minister could ignore the calls of 1,000 constituents. Constituents who, mind you, have cared for the land that this country derives its wealth from for some 60,000 years. I was angry at the disrespect. But later that day, as I drove to work with Professor Megan Davis, we were listening to Noel Pearson on RN Drive. And my anger turned to sadness because Noel's signature stoicism had cracked and I burst into tears. But this despair was short-lived. What I had learned from the experience of being at these dialogues was that I am part, and we are all part, of a long history of activism in this space. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have once again identified the solution, and while the government drags its feet, we are determined to keep the momentum going. So why am I here tonight? Because we're determined to continue to pursue the reforms sought in the Uluru Statement from the heart. But after the Referendum Council came to an end, so did the funding that helps us to carry out this important work. This is Arnie Pat Anderson and Professor Megan Davis. Together with Noel Pearson, they're gathering a leadership group of leaders from the dialogues together to strategise, share information, and get the message out to our community that we're not giving up, we're pressing ahead, and that we need to have a seat at the table in making the Voice to Parliament a reality. The Indigenous Law Centre at UNSW is the backbone organisation for this process. Our goal is to ensure that the dialogue continues. We facilitate meetings of First Nations leaders, peak organisations and community members from all over the country to ensure that we have a voice in the design of the voice, a voice in the path to recognition, and a voice in ensuring that this historic opportunity is not lost. Time is of the essence for us. A loss of momentum on our part is likely to see the government pursue forms of recognition that we don't want, that the community have told us they don't want. Our cries have to stop falling on deaf ears. They asked us how we wanted to be recognised, and we answered loud and clear: voice, treaty, truth. And the blatant disregard for our answer highlights precisely why we need this voice. There is power in voice. They know it. They've had it for centuries. And now it's our turn. We're seeking $150,000, which will allow the ILC to employ a full-time coordinator, an Indigenous person who can facilitate meetings, assist Arnie, Pat and Megan with their work, and help us work with community leaders and members. First Nations voice must underpin the guide the development of what the voice to Parliament looks like. We must lead this country to a referendum. Through your philanthropy, you enable our voices to be heard and will forge a pathway for true self-determination. Without philanthropic community standing behind us, it's just not going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gemma. That was very powerful. We are now going to hear from a funder and advocate for Voice Treaty Truth, another Gemma Salteri, who I'm not sure where she's... Oh, you're right in front of me. Go for it, Gemma.
Thank you. And first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country in which we're meeting on and recognise that it is in their collective wisdom, the elders past, the elders present and the elders, the future leaders of our traditional nations, that the answers to healing the trauma of colonisation lie. We've supported this work for a year now, and we will continue to do so. I'm from Cage's Foundation up in Sydney, and I think Gemma has outlined why we support this work really eloquently. This work needs to be funded. It needs to be led by our Aboriginal people. We need structural reform in this country. When my family and our foundation read the Uluru Statement from the Heart almost 2.5 years ago, we decided we would answer the call to walk with our First Nations people. We accept the generous invitation to join them in their journey. We acknowledge that we need their leadership, and the way we can support the voice to Parliament, which is critical for our First Nations people and for our country, is to fund this vital work.
Thank you, Gemma. I'll invite Ali up to the stage and ask for questions. Any questions from the audience?
Hi Megan, and look, that was great. Thank you so much for that presentation. It was really inspiring. I'm just going to ask a question that maybe some other people in the room might be thinking about. Reconciliation Australia some years ago implemented the Recognise campaign, and it was supported by government, and then funding was taken away. I'm just wondering if you could talk to the audience about how you actually are different from what Recognise was trying to do, because it was supported heavily by philanthropy as well, and I think the outcomes weren't what people had expected. I'm just wondering if you could please highlight the differences and what you actually think that will be achieved that's different. Thank you.
Question to start off with. So the difficulty that the Recognise campaign faced was that it didn't gain enough support from the Aboriginal community. So when we were running the dialogues, we had to, at the first half hour was basically spent explaining to people that we're not recognised. And the reason that the Aboriginal community were upset with the way that Recognise worked is that they didn't engage with the community in the way that the Referendum Council did. They sort of pressed ahead with a campaign with lots of corporate sponsorship and all of those sorts of things, but hadn't actually spoken to the community about what the community want from recognition. What does that big R actually look like in practice? So what the Referendum Council did is actually ask the to be recognised how they wanted that to look. And that's really, I think, given, well, me as an individual, but us as a group, that's our mandate really, is to push for what the people that we spoke to are seeking. It's not necessarily it's not about individualism, it's collective, and that's the way that we've lived for thousands and thousands of years. So we believe that maintaining that support from the Aboriginal community is key, and that needs to be done, as well as gaining the support of the 97%.
Thanks, Gemma. Any other questions?
Thank you very much. How much do you think a change of government would make? How much difference?
We, leading up to the last election, were very, very confident because we have full support for the Labor Party. The Labor Party support a constitutionally enshrined voice to Parliament. So that would make a difference, I would hope. But at the same time, we're aware that the momentum has to be maintained, and maintaining that for another 3 or 4 years is going to be very difficult. But also that time is of the essence. Like, one of the really interesting things I think that I learnt during the dialogue process is, particularly for, we ran a dialogue in Ross River, just outside of Alice Springs, and the people there, and the people at the Broome Dialogue, for example, were very clear that they need change to happen now, because they don't have, sealed roads or running water in their homes. For them, this is urgent, and so waiting for a better government may, not necessarily be the best option for them. But yeah.
Questions? Steve, at the front. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Gemma. I'm with you with the Voice Treaty Truth. What I was interested in was to see, how do you see the change happening? How are you going to try and influence the government to change their policies? Because I think in itself, giving a voice to Aboriginal people is great, but then how do you make the next step?
So what we know is that there is appetite for a constitutionally enshrined voice, even within the Liberal Party. What they want to see is a clear path as to how to get there. So one of the things that we are doing is using the dialogue process to design the process for designing the dialogues, but also to design the voice, to explain to government, this is what it's going to look like, this is how the existing structures within Aboriginal communities are going to clip into the voice. They really want to be shown very specifically, this is how it's going to work. In terms of the public support, we feel that we're sort of halfway there with that, and that there will then be, once we know what we're looking for specifically, then public education campaigns and things like that. But at the moment, what our team is focused on is making sure that the mob are on board.
Unless there's one very quick burning question, we might stop it there in the interest of time. No? Okay. Can you please thank Gemma?
And our final presenters for the night are Craig Reucassel, who you might recognise from War on Waste and The Chaser, and Malinda Wink from Shark Island Productions coming up. They'll be presenting Democracy for Sale, social change documentary. Thanks.
Thank you very much, guys. There's two of us, and we've got a little bit of video as well, so I'll get this speed date underway for the 6 minutes. I'll go first. This is a documentary and impact campaign called Democracy for Sale, and it's about the influence of corruption in our politics today. Now, this is an issue that I'm very passionate about and have been for many years. The reason I'm so passionate about it at the moment, though, and I think we really need to engage with it, I'm currently doing a climate change documentary at the moment. And it's interesting, over the kind of years I've been researching for this, how often, when you come to a part in the climate change debate where it doesn't make sense to you, where it's like, how come most people think something should be done, but it's not being done? How come the economics is pushing this way, but it's not happening? How come this makes sense in all these ways, it's not happening? Generally, the answer to that is it comes down to the money in politics. It comes down to donations and networks that exist in politics. And that is one of the fundamental pieces of the puzzle that we need to change if we're actually going to get the fair and sustainable society that we're all trying to look at. And when you look at what's unfair and what's unsustainable, it generally comes back to this money that exists in politics. Just quickly about the approach to this documentary, we are very much intending to make it something that uses humour. We're trying to get it to a broader audience. We do not want to preach the converted, essentially. You know, we think that people have this sense of the corruption that exists, but don't necessarily know how it happens and how it actually affects their lives, the policies that affect them, and that kind of thing. So we really want to use a bit of humour, particularly also to aim for a younger audience, which is also harder to get to nowadays, but I think humour is obviously a very good way to do that. A second thing just about the approach to this is that we're not wanting to undermine democracy. As a matter of fact, we really want to strengthen it. The whole message of this is that democracy has been corrupted, and we need to go back to those initial ideals. We don't need to have certain parties in that who have a ridiculously overhyped voice because of the money that they contribute to it. So we really want to basically get the debate started, get people knowing about this, and increase the campaign, increase the pressure, and that goes on to the Impact Fund, which Malinda will speak to after we show a little bit of the trailer. This part doesn't count as time. Neither does this bit.
In Australia, we've got deadly animals aplenty. We've got funnel web spiders who'll murder you and your family. We've got the world's deadliest creatures all over the place. We've got magpies who'll steal the eyeballs from your face. But at least we don't have AR-15s.
It's killing it, eh? It's going off. The whole chorus of the song was, "At least we don't have AR-15s."
Yeah, I know that, man. I wrote it.
Well, people are saying in the comments that we do have AR-15s. What?
I got it wrong. We do have AR-15s, and they're even manufactured here.
I'm going to fix this.
But what I discovered was an organised, well-funded gun lobby throwing cash around Parliament House trying to relax our gun laws. And that was just a symptom of a much bigger problem, where our major parties raise over $60 million from donors, many of them secret, many of them obviously wanting something in return.
Mining, health, education, the whole system is fixed.
It turns out this problem's a whole lot bigger than guns. I've always been really proud of being Australian, and maybe this isn't the lucky country. Maybe it's just a country where one can buy their own luck.
I know this system inside out. I was the biggest ever fundraiser the Labor Party ever had. And I can tell you, what you're about to enter into is far shadier than you could ever predict from the outside.
What kind of access does a lobbyist have that is greater than a normal person?
They have a pass to this otherwise restricted building.
So they physically do open doors?
Knock, 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 open.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds f***ed.
In the world of donations and lobbying, you're not paying $12,000 for lunch.
Can I help you?
Yeah, I'm a businessman in my business suit. I just flew here business class.
They're paying $12,000 because that's what pay-to-play looks like.
All right, we'll leave it there. It all gets even better than that afterwards, but I'll go to Malinda.
Is it on?
Yes.
Thanks, Craig. So this particular film we supported through the Shark Island Institute, and the reason we were really excited about it was that across the Good Pitch process and experience with our 19 campaigns across a broad spectrum of social justice issues. We were finding that whether it be marriage equality or marine parks, the coal seam gas issue or the sugar industry, it was always money that was getting in the way of great policy outcomes. And so when Craig and the team came with this particular project, we could see the connections across all the social justice issues and environmental issues that we cared about. So with that in mind, we're bringing in all of the expertise, insight and scar tissue, frankly, from working on the Good Pitch program for the last 6 years. And so we see this film as working a little bit like the sugar film. It's got a humorous approach, like sugar, with a capacity to tell a very bitter truth and engage a very broad audience that's otherwise very disengaged from this particular message. So we're looking at 3 parts to it. The impact campaign will actually start before the film is released to ensure that the recommendations and solutions that are presented in the film are those that our stakeholders are also working on, and so it points to the right direction. And certainly then the event screenings, the Q&A screenings like Damon did across the country to commence a huge community conversation, and then to back in and provide a platform for the stakeholders who have been working tirelessly in this issue arena to try and get the reforms that they're seeking for. We really do, one final thing is the approach is actually really importantly non-partisan. We've adopted that across all the Good Pitch portfolio. The issue is so much bigger than one party alone. It's a systemic one, and so that's the approach in the film, and it's also the approach of the campaign. I welcome you to join us, and I totally commend this amazing team that's bringing this film to life.
And you had time to spare. You could have spoken less quickly,
The
Craig.
whole thing,
Jeez.
yeah. Well.
Okay, so we would love to now hear from John Spearings, who's the Executive Officer of Reichstein Foundation, about why his organisation and network supports this project.
Thanks, Georgia. Thanks, Craig. Thanks, Malinda. Thanks to the ACF community. Fantastic to see so many people here tonight. I don't want Australia to go down the American route. I don't want our politics to be filled with dark money. I want us to be an open, accountable and transparent democracy where every voice counts. And that's not the case at the moment. Our politics are stuck and people know it. Political donations are the cancer that's eating at trust in our democracy. Many of you would have funded the gambling campaign down in Tasmania 2 years ago, when we saw the real effect of political donations to stymie reform, when the pokie industry ponied up hundreds of thousands of dollars to protect their industry and their profits. We saw just a couple of weeks ago, Nine Entertainment hosting political parties at fundraisers when those political parties will set the regulatory and tax environment for Nine Entertainment. We know a mining magnate spent $55 million in the recent election, and nobody bats an eyelid. Who refers to it in the public discourse today? So I'm angry. I'm angry because our inaction on political donations is also stymieing the things that we're in this room for. Things like social justice, action on climate change, Indigenous rights are all being put backwards because we're not fixing a core part of the problem. I'm putting my faith in a team that tells a big story with effect and with impact, and who's got a track record of creating change. And I hope you'll join me in supporting them as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you, John. Okay, we'll open it up to questions now. Who would like to go first?
All right, thank you. We just heard about we don't want to go down the American track, and certainly we don't. Is there a model society out there that we would want to follow or copy?
It's interesting because even Norway, which is normally, we look to for everything, has some problems with this. But they did, in the early 2000s, do a massive study into their democracy and kind of looked to stop this happening and have actually been more effective at stopping it. And interestingly, the third part of the movie actually does go to America. And that's because the fascinating thing is that we can learn things from both sides over there. They are worse than us. There are some instances where our laws are worse than America's. And there's also some instances where the kind of solutions that are coming from the public, from the grassroots level, I think are more innovative and are a good example for Australia as well. So America is a terrible example, but in some cases we're worse. So there you go, take that home.
Hi. What are some of the practical legislative changes that you would want to bring about? What are the kinds of changes that you think are needed in Australia?
I think some of the easy stuff first is just total transparency up front initially. So at the moment you've got for the major parties about 80% of the funding you don't actually know where it comes from. And then when you do find out when it comes out, for the other 20%, it comes out 18 months or a year after it's actually been done. In Queensland, for instance, they put in stuff where you immediately know who's donated. You know, you need the journalists to be able to immediately track that kind of stuff. It's always kind of going, oh, that makes sense now, 18 months later when we find out about it. So you can do that straight away, and there's absolutely nothing getting in the way of that. You've got to bring out down the levels by which people can actually make donations as well. At the moment, I could donate over 100 grand to the political parties and no one would even know it. And, you know, they know it, but everyone else wouldn't know it. So there are lots of those kind of transparency stuff that are easier first steps. There's also some harder stuff that comes from that kind of revolving door. It's like, you know, I run the Minerals Council and I also then go in and become the Chief of Staff. That kind of stuff's a bit more complex too.
I'm glad that it's bipartisan, but we've had resistance from all sides of politics for this. So how are we going to engage the politicians that resist on both sides to come to the party and say, yes, we do need this?
I'll answer the first half of that, and Malinda can answer the second half, because that comes also in the impact. Part of the first half of it, and this is why we're going to really aim at the general public in this, is that, and you've got to get them watching this, is because you've got to get it to the point whereby it becomes an issue that has enough resonance that there's a bit of shame involved. At the moment, the politicians feel like they can get away with it because there's the occasional four corners story, but it doesn't really have that kind of element of the public really getting behind it. And so Christian Van Vuren, who's in the movie, is fantastic at doing viral videos, so we want to get it so it's out on Facebook and social media and really hammering people. We want to create the environment where politicians are having to answer the questions, be embarrassed about it, be concerned about it, and that's then when the impact campaign comes in, because it's a slow process to get that change to happen. It needs kind of years of work.
I mean, Gaby Baby is a great example of that. When we worked on that campaign, there was obviously an inside track to convince those politicians who were convincible to come on board and to forget about the remainder who weren't ever going to come on board with that issue. And so we worked with particular stakeholders who had the ear of certain people in certain part of the political spectrum, and others who had the ear of other people within the Liberal Party or other factions. But what we found was that, and the stakeholders we've been speaking to so far with this particular project are saying the same thing, that we're working the inside track, we're having the considered conversations, but actually we need pressure on the outside to actually provide the momentum for reform. So with both of those things needs to happen at once, so that we do get across the line on some of the reforms that.
I would think there are quite a lot of politicians who'd be very relieved to have clearer rules.
That's the thing.
This is it. A lot of them hate. We've spoken to lots of politicians. They hate it too. It's an absolute pain in their life. A lot of people go into politics with really good intentions, and they get caught up in this shit, and it really undermines it, and they don't like it. So yeah, it's also from the inside. We want to play on that too.
Thank you both. Two questions, if I may. Firstly, where does the 150,000 fit into the production, post-production, distribution, etc.? And finally, how do you assess the success of this project, other than hopefully entertaining a whole bunch of millennials and probably their elderly parents?
I'll let you cover millennials. I can do budget.
You can do the budget and that stuff. I'll answer the other thing.
So the budget's been primarily raised in production by private sources of finance from screen agencies, private screen finance. There is an 887,000 shortfall on that production, and that's because we want to do a 2x1 hour, a feature and all the viral videos to make sure it just goes out in all places. In terms of the outreach campaign, to put it into perspective, the sugar campaign had 450,000 to run a 3-year campaign. It was very successful across shifting consciousness, behaviour, and also reforming the policy environment. So the 150 kicks us off. It doesn't get us the whole way there, but it certainly will make a massive impact in our ability to use this opportunity of the film to drive change.
Yeah, and just so, this money's for the impact campaign, not for making the production. So we're also, it's not only going to be a movie, a documentary movie, we're also going to put it as a 2-part series on the ABC as well. We want to get to as many eyeballs as possible and also then use social media as that. Look, the intention is to entertain, but the intention is to entertain to get people in the door of watching it and get them outraged. You get them in with some entertainment, they come out the other end, they've liked it, but they're also engaged and enraged. And that's what leads to those kind of further changes down the track. And that's what we want to link up. We want to link up the organisations right now who are looking at these reforms and trying to push for those changes with the kind of public being engaged and enraged about it, and we think that's going to be a much more powerful thing that will lead to change. It's interesting how many politicians have said to me recently, you don't understand, we don't lead, we follow. They need the pressure on them, that's when they do change.
Christian and the millennials.
Yes, and Christian and the millennials, that's why Christian is here. He's got so many viral videos that have gone nuts around the world. It's quite extraordinary, his capacity to do that. And he's got a huge millennial following. If you looked at him and went, I don't know who that guy was, it's because you're too old. But that's right. You will watch it anyway. It's fine.
Thank you. Give it up. Mel and Craig. That's it.
That's it. Well, not quite. Still us to go. So thank you so much to all of the amazing change makers that spoke tonight. You know, it doesn't happen easily. There's been a lot of work from these guys that have gone into standing up here in front of you all today. And I can certainly vouch for the fact that it's a little bit daunting standing up here in front of 150 odd people and talking. So can we please have another round of applause for all of the people? And so Australian Communities Foundation and the members of our community and the change makers that you've heard from tonight, everyone from our funder advocates to our civil society partners that are making the change on the ground, share this collective vision of a fair and more sustainable Australia, an Australia where social, cultural and environmental justice is the norm. And Marie started out the evening by outlining this bold vision, and we hope that by hearing some of these change makers speak to you tonight, it's made that feel a little bit more attainable for you guys.
So what now? This is the pointy end. It doesn't matter if you're an individual donor or an ACF fund holder or an external trust and foundation. Everybody can co-fund with the Impact Fund. So you can make a direct donation through the Impact Fund. You can make a grant request to the ACF team. ACF fund holders will know what that means. And you can also give a grant directly to the organisations doing the work and coordinate with our process. So we're inviting you to get on board. Like we said earlier, on your seat there's a pledge form, a prospectus and a pen. If you're ready, you can fill out the pledge form, hand it to an ACF team member, put it in the box as you're leaving. And if you're not, and you need a little bit more time to think about what projects you might want to support and to what extent, because you are so incredibly spoiled for choice, then that is fine too, because we'll be following up with you anyway. So stay, please, enjoy another drink, enjoy some more food, and meet someone you don't know to discuss what you've just heard about. And we're really looking forward to collaborating with you all. So thank you very much.